What's in a name? The president turns the clock back on the Department of Defense. Plus, with a $50 million bounty hanging over his head, Nicolas Maduro vows a response to the U.S. military strike on a Venezuelan boat. And a move towards modernization, why the Air Force is shutting down a nuclear missile silo. Hey folks, welcome to Weapons and Warfare. Whether you're hanging with friends or debating fools in the comment section, our goal is to help you have an informed conversation about what's happening with America's national defense. For Straight Arrow News, I'm your host, Ryan Robertson, and we start this week with Ukraine and what peace might look like for the nearly 40 million people who live there once the war ends. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine looks destined to hit the 4-year mark. Still, preparations for an eventual peace need to be made, which has many wondering what exactly that will look like for a war-torn nation that once boasted a population of nearly 40 million. In early September, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv and its allies have a general vision for security guarantees against future Russian aggression, and that more than 24 countries were exploring exactly what role they would play. Keir Giles, author of Who Will Defend Europe, says there's a large gap between being willing and being capable.
What all European countries seeking to support and protect Ukraine face is the reality of the aftermath of decades of defense drawdowns in their own armed forces. It's only the easternmost states, the frontline states, that have taken seriously the need to rearm and re-equip and rebuild their military potential. West of Warsaw, that task is still lying ahead of them. So what these countries that have got together to try to support Ukraine may be swiftly realizing is that a coalition of the willing is something very different from a coalition of the able.
Around 30 Western leaders took part in talks with Zelensky in Paris on potential commitments to bolster Kyiv's defense following any potential truce with Russia. Giles says the only meaningful security guarantees for Ukraine would be serious military consequences for Russia if it launched new attacks.
The question is whether European powers are willing either to build up Ukraine's own armed forces in order to be able to deliver that damage, or to promise to deliver it themselves by means of an unshakable and undoubted commitment to Ukraine's future security.
Earlier this month, in a warning to Kyiv's allies, Russian President Vladimir Putin said any Western troops deployed to Ukraine would be legitimate targets for Moscow to attack. Russia has long argued one of its reasons for going to war in Ukraine was to prevent NATO from admitting Kyiv as a member and placing its forces in Ukraine.
We've already heard suggestions from Moscow that it should be part of any future security package for Ukraine, in the same way that it was part of the Budapest Memorandum signed in 1994, which supposedly guaranteed the territorial integrity of Ukraine against, for example, Russia. There's no doubt that the vagueness of this term provides Russia with an opportunity to shape the narrative towards its own ends.
A recent report by NBC News detailed how the U.S. could take a lead role in monitoring a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia if and when a peace deal is reached.
On the one hand, the fact that Donald Trump appears to be engaging with this process is encouraging. On the other hand, it's entirely unclear what the United States might be willing to do in order to support future security guarantees for Ukraine. We've heard a range of different positions laid out apparently firmly by Trump and by the US, from no involvement whatsoever to some vague and unspecified commitments, something to do with the air.
President Trump hosted Vladimir Putin amid great fanfare for a summit in Alaska last month. Trump even hand-delivered a letter to Putin written by First Lady Melania Trump, pleading with the Russian leader to return the Ukrainian children his forces had kidnapped. But Putin didn't, and instead ordered a massive strike on an American-linked factory in Ukraine. And there certainly has been no indication of Moscow softening any of its terms for ending the war or agreeing to a meeting with Ukrainian leadership. I'm joined now by senior producer and Air Force veteran Brett Baker for some headlines you may have missed. And Brett, breaking news to report: by the time this episode publishes to the interwebs, you and I are going to be in Ukraine reporting and gathering some stories.
Yeah, very exciting development. I don't think any of us at the beginning of the year would probably predicted that trip would be in store for us, but it is. And I know we're excited to go and get some excellent content and bring it back to share with, not only weapons and warfare, but the Straight Arrow News viewership.
Absolutely. And it's we're not going to be at the front lines or anything like that, but we are going to Ukraine. Our families are a little nervous, but you and I were talking a little bit earlier as journalists. I think you said your point was, it's just one of those opportunities that you can't really pass up. So looking forward to it for sure. So, all right, let's get to those headlines. Bucking constitutional norms once again, President Donald Trump recently signed an executive order returning the Department of Defense to its original name, the Department of War.
Mr. President, is it your expectation that Congress will codify this name change in the law?
I don't know, but we're going to find out, but I'm not sure they have to. We're signing an executive order today.
So a little history lesson. The Department of War was created in 1789. It was changed by President Harry Truman in 1947 to the Department of Defense when it incorporated the Department of War, which oversaw the Army, plus the Department of the Navy and the newly created Independent Air Force. So, Brett, you and I had talked about this last week because we kind of knew this was probably coming down the pike.
Yeah, it was kind of floated out there, and sure enough, it turned out to be the case. Interesting thing, you actually need congressional approval to change the name of the department. So to get by that, it is apparently a secondary name. So
Right.
It still is the Department of Defense for all intents and purposes. This is just a language thing that they're, jazzed up about. I don't really understand it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely a marketing and branding thing. It kind of reminds me of when businesses are incorporated under one LLC, but they operate under a DBA, a doing business as, like a different name. But it's essentially it's all the same folks doing the same stuff. But the Secretary of Defense did update a lot of his social media handles to now reflect the new title that he's operating under, the Secretary of War. But to your point, Brett, doesn't necessarily change much from a logistics standpoint necessarily, but we'll see how this plays out in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Hey, remember that U.S. missile strike in the Caribbean that killed 11 people? The White House said they were drug smugglers and drug traffickers and part of Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is warning other would-be traffickers more could still be in store.
If you're on a boat full of cocaine or fentanyl or whatever headed to the United States, you're an immediate threat to the United States. And the president, under his authority as commander-in-chief, has a right under exigent circumstances to eliminate imminent threats to the United States.
Rubio faced some pretty pointed questions from a few media members about the legality of the operation. He did defend the strike, but didn't really go into any details about it, like whether those aboard the boat were warned before being fired upon. Brett, the strike on the boat kind of reminded me of all of the drone strikes from back in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars under the Obama administration. What do you think?
Yeah, for good reason. It looks a little like a video game, right? Rarely you see an individual, that high up in our political chain, our government chain, put out a video of 11 people being wiped out of existence. Yeah, it's an interesting position to take. Not giving them any kind of heads up, any warning, not trying to maybe apprehend them. That's one that they're going to have to deal with. It wouldn't be my play, but that's, one of those things that is going to happen with this administration.
I will say, after talking with a couple of folks, a couple of contacts that we have, however it's being portrayed, in the headlines or in the media or anything like that, these military contacts did say that the strike, from a military kill chain perspective, would not have been authorized without positive identification on the individuals on the boat. So take that for what it is. But yeah, this is definitely the Trump administration, the White House, really upping the game against the cartels at a time when he's campaigned upon, getting fentanyl back, stopping it from coming across the border, stopping drug trafficking, human trafficking. And he points to the Nicolas Maduro regime as being one of the primary players in that game. So that's why there's so much of a concerted effort to stop Venezuela and the Maduro regime in its alleged ties to narco-terrorist states. All right, last headline for you today, and it's a big one. The outlet Breaking Defense reported the U.S. Air Force officially decommissioned its first Minuteman III missile silo at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in my old hometown of Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's part of the service's modernization process of America's nuclear triad, where Minuteman III ICBMs are getting swapped out for the new Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are made by Northrop Grumman. In the midst of this transition, though, Air Force officials say the readiness and alert status of the remaining ICBMs will remain unaffected during this process. So basically saying just because one is down doesn't mean we don't have more pointed at you, whoever you may be. Brett, you and I have spoken to Lieutenant General Mark Wetherington before. He was one of the guys who used to oversee the Air Force's Global Strike program. And he told us the old Minuteman silos were originally going to be reused with the Sentinel program, but now it looks like it's going to be cheaper to just build new holes and, put the new missiles in new holes in the ground.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no home redo show, flip this silo. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those silos, I mean, they're decades old. Technology has changed. What the crews that operate them need has changed. So it's not that big a surprise. I think it obviously would be a nice thing to probably maybe save some money to just be able to renovate those. But at a certain point in time, you have to figure, okay, it probably is just cheaper to dig a new hole and start from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you have to tear out all the old stuff, and if there's, the mitigation for any kind of caustic chemicals or anything like that, I mean, throw some dirt on the top, start over. It's definitely a cheaper way. Environmentally speaking, I'm sure there's going to be some folks who, protest about this, but from a, protection of the country, we need these things. It is part of the nuclear deterrence. The nuclear triad is what has kept the world in a mostly peaceful state over the last 85 years or so. So we need these, especially with China building more. They are good to have. All right, Brett, the next time we do this, we'll have some stories from Ukraine to tell.
We'll be in Ukraine. So yeah, it'll be fun. We're looking forward to it.
In 1962, Hanna-Barbera offered a version of what life on Earth might be like 100 years in the future with the Jetsons.
Meet George Jetson!
Showcasing all kinds of space-age technology woven into everyday life, but nothing quite captured the audience's attention like the promise of flying cars. While 2062 is still 37 years away, that promise might be closer than you think. At this year's Soft Week in Tampa, Florida, we saw something that captured our attention like George Jetson's daily driver did 63 years ago. That's why Pivotal's Blackfly eVTOL is our weapon of the week.
Okay, Ken, I'm ready for takeoff.
Go for takeoff.
When you first see it, the Blackfly kind of looks like a next-gen remote-controlled drone. But a double take reveals something else entirely. An American-made, all-electric flying vehicle capable of vertical takeoffs and landings. Made by Pivotal, the Blackfly and its successor, the Helix, were built for private use and emergency medical services. But now there's an eye on bringing this tech to the military.
There are a number of missions that we think that we are ideally suited for. In the near term, that could be covert insertion, covert extraction. It could be rescue of a downed pilot or a stranded individual in a SAR or SEER situation.
Ken Karkland, Pivotal's CEO, says their vehicles are also capable of uncrewed flight.
You could send out a number of these aircraft autonomously because they're actually at an attritable price point. And then one of them comes back with that stranded individual who is able to fly themselves back, or it's done remotely.
If early signs are any indication, the military is interested as well. In 2024, Pivotal delivered 4 Blackflies to AFWorks, the innovation wing at the Air Force Research Lab. Kirkland says that kind of interest is pushing Pivotal to develop the next evolution of their aircraft.
We're going to be working very diligently on the big brother to the Helix, which is very defense focused. It's called the Spira. It's the same fundamental architecture, same building blocks. It's our platform, but about an order of magnitude up on the gross takeoff weight. So rather than something north of 500 pounds, it would be something just north of 5,000 pounds, capable of carrying 2,000 pounds of cargo, 300 nautical miles.
Pivotal also landed a 2-year deal with the Air Force and AFWERX Agility Prime that gives them access to testing facilities, expert resources, and several sites within restricted airspace. With that kind of support, Pivotal can speed up both crewed and uncrewed flight testing and system verification, boosting the chances for getting a Pivotal aircraft into operation.
Where we really want to focus is in the defense space, because we sincerely believe that there are some missions out there we can do better than anyone else can at a better cost point and solve real problems for the warfighter. So that's why we're here.
Time now for comms check and hat tip to Air Force Chief of Staff General David Alvin for the heads up on a pretty significant milestone in the competition between General Atomics and Anduril to build the Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft, also known as CCA. In late August, the general posted this to one of his social media accounts. CCA is in the air less than 2 years after the program began. Your Air Force is moving fast and learning fast. CCA will help us rethink the battle space, extend reach, and optimize warfighter performance through human-machine teaming. Developed with General Atomics, the YFQ-42A's recent flight in California gathered important data on airworthiness and flight autonomy. It's all part of a larger plan to introduce modular, cost-effective, uncrewed aircraft that will operate alongside next-generation crewed aircraft. The CCA is part of the next-generation air dominance family of systems, focusing on modular, software-defined air power. And as far as we know, Anduril's entry in the competition, the YFQ-44A, also known as the Fury, hasn't flown quite yet, though it is expected to enter flight testing in the very near future.
All opinions expressed in this segment are solely the opinions of the contributors.
All right, folks, for my wrap this week, we're doing something a little different. We're talking about jobs, specifically manufacturing jobs. As far back as I can remember, presidents and political leaders have been promising to bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States. And for as far back as I can remember, the number of people employed in the manufacturing sector has been on the decline. It peaked in 1979 with just shy of 20 million U.S. citizens employed in that sector. In August, that number sat at 12.7 million. There are some hard truths to swallow when it comes to bringing back manufacturing. For starters, for a lot of things like consumer electronics, it's cost prohibitive. Americans demand too high a wage for it to make financial sense to build cell phones or stereos in the United States. A $1,000 iPhone would quickly become a $4,000 iPhone. But when it comes to defensive manufacturing, the industry is growing by leaps and bounds. Startups like PDW are building new facilities, former startups like Anduril are expanding at breakneck speeds, and even the prime contractors are building new production lines and expanding existing ones to meet the demands for things like HIMARS launchers, Patriot missiles, and other platforms. Which leads us to a second hard truth. The U.S. can bring back thousands of manufacturing jobs, maybe millions, but it means making weapons, something many Americans are uncomfortable with. But the world is headed for some rocky times ahead. All the major American adversaries just had a get-together in China, celebrating all the latest weapons designed to keep America out of their way. So when it comes to protecting American lives and American livelihoods, to me, the answer to both is building more American-made defensive products. And that's going to do it for us this week, folks. If you like what you saw and or heard, please like and subscribe to our social media feeds, download the Straight Arrow News app, and maybe more importantly, share our stories. We're on a mission to help people have a more informed conversation about the U.S. military and our national defense, and we are recruiting volunteers to help. So, until next time, for senior producer Brett Baker, video editor Brian Spencer, and motion designer Dakota Patillo, I'm Ryan Robertson with Straight Arrow News, signing off.